Sustainability is an abstract concept, and it's best to teach it within specific examples. So within the specific example of trying to evaluate different fuel sources, it's challenging because you have to consider long time scales in terms of the environmental and economic impacts of using different fuels, and then you have to also consider trade-offs associated with different fuels. So considering the economic impacts, the costs of using different fuels, and then also many environmental impacts, from greenhouse gas emissions to biodiversity impacts to water quality issues. There's just a really complex web of data to analyze and consider when you evaluate different fuels, and that's really challenging for students, and also challenging to teach in the classroom.
I think one of the major things we see in classrooms, and one thing we know from educational research, is that kids need to be engaged in conversations about science ideas in order for learning to happen. So we know that from sort of 20 to 50 years of science education research. And the thing that this video game does, and that video games generally do, is, I think, when played in pairs, allow students to have really meaningful conversations with each other.
So Fields of Fuel is really this kind of multiplayer, web-based, simulated environment that's designed to teach students about sustainability and how it affects biofuels production. So typically when kids are playing, they'll look at first what kind of crops they want to plant. They'll have three decisions. They can either plant alfalfa, which is a perennial, they can plant switchgrass, which is also a perennial, or corn. After they make their cropping decision, they'll go to the next stage, which is actually optional, but they'll make management decisions about what they want to do in terms of fertilization and tillage, which can affect their yield and their environmental impacts. And then they'll go to a harvest stage where they harvest their crops and then look at what the responses are in terms of the environmental impact, their energy production, and their economic success there.
I think the data in Fields of Fuel is valuable for a couple of reasons. The first one is that we give them such a rich set of possible data to look at that it allows them to pick and choose what they think is important. So part of the work that you do with your partner when you're playing the game is deciding which of these pieces of data do I want to pay attention to over time. And that's one of the big pushes of the Next Generation Science Standards, is providing students with this opportunity to reason about data in order to construct explanatory models. When I've seen it played in the classroom, actually, it's really neat to watch. We would hear kids yell across the room and say these things like, "Why in the world are you planting switchgrass?" or "Why are you planting corn?" And the teacher was particularly masterful at pulling up on the screen the two different students' plots and saying, okay, this student is making one decision, this student is making another decision. Let's look at their data and compare which decision is better. So she sort of turned this competitive nature of the game into an opportunity to have the students really engage in a substantive argument about why they were choosing different strategies. So when it gets down to the last 30 seconds and the teacher says, you have 30 seconds to decide, you see a splat of kid conversation that's just really rich and interesting. So that, I think, was the most successful part of the game for me, was seeing these kids engage in conversations about the game and about sustainability, really.